Hello dear students, how are you? I hope you are fine. Today, this is lecture number 6. We are talking about Goodbye Mr. Chips, our novel in second year English. In this video lesson, which is lecture number 6 on Goodbye Mr. Chips, we will revise what we recently studied in chapter number 1. We will recapitulate, we will evaluate the things we have studied in chapter 1. We will see, as we said at the end of the previous video, what are the main events that took place in Goodbye Mr. Chips. We will also see, it's a sort of summary we will discuss here, and we will also see how this chapter is important as far as the final examinations are concerned. When this chapter starts, chapter number 1, we see that Mrs. Wickett and Mr. Chips, they are living in the same house. Mr. Chips has joined Mrs. Wickett as a paying guest. Both of them are living a retired life. Both of them are familyless, alone, and they are staying there together. And we also saw that this house, Mrs. Wickett's house where Mr. Chips is staying, it is right in front of the Brookfield School. So we see how Mr. Chips is spending his retired life. We see him taking tea. We see him talking to Mrs. Wickett. We see him remembering his past, all the time lost in the previous life memories, recapitulating, revising, memorizing all the previous incidences that took place in his life, what and how the time was spent in the Brookfield School. He's taking tea, sitting in front of the fire, reading books, and taking a lot of rest. These are the activities Mr. Chips is found to be involved in while he's staying at Mrs. Wickett's house. This is what we studied in the beginning of the beginning of chapter number 1. Next, we see that Dr. Merriweather visits Mr. Chips every fortnight or so. Fortnight we studied means 15 days. It means that Dr. Merriweather visits Mr. Chips twice a month. Dr. Emanuel, we see that thinks that Mr. Chips is a fit old man. He's healthy and he's strong. He thinks that he will die a natural death. He encourages all the time Mr. Chips not to worry about his health. He comments that you are fitter than me, means that Mr. Chips himself is fitter than Dr. Merriweather. But at the same time, when Dr. Merriweather and Mrs. Wickett are alone, Dr. Merriweather tells the concerns about Mr. Chips' health, which are, he says to Mrs. Wickett that take good care of him because his chest is not good and he needs attention, he needs care at this age. Later in this chapter, we also see that this chapter is a sort of introductory passage for Mrs. Wickett. Mrs. Wickett is one of the most important characters throughout this novel. She is the lady in whose house Mr. Chips is living. Mr. Chips and Mrs. Wickett, we found in this chapter, they have also been working together in 2 schools. First in some other school and then in Brookfield they work together. We see that Mrs. Wickett is a caring lady. She takes good care of Mr. Chips. They both have quite a good understanding. They have good relationship and they are careful they are conscious about each other. They take they take good care of each other. We see that Mrs. Wickett also, she don't have any family. She doesn't have any family. So next we see in this chapter that Mr. Chip's first day on Brookfield is discussed. How he was interviewed by the principal Weatherby, the day he first stepped into Brookfield School, how the two teams were playing cricket, the season, what was the season, and all the activities taking place, Mr. Chip's first interview, and then we see that Mr. Chips joined, he got through the interview, and this chapter is also an introduction about Mr. Weatherby, one of the principals of Brookfield School. Now, Dr. Merriwell, Mrs. Wickett, and Weatherby. These three characters are very important in this novel. Students should know them well. We often see questions in the final examination about these three characters. Weatherby was the principal of Brookfield School when Mr. Chips joined the school. He wasn't good in health. He has had many diseases, or he was not fit. When Mr. Chips was interviewed, he interviewed Mr. Chips, but when he joined, after some months, soon Mr. Weatherby died. But Mr. Chips, at this old age, we see in chapter number 1, he has clear memories about this principle. Next, another very important incident that we come to know in this chapter is how Mr. Chips delivered his first lecture at Brookfield. How did he learn to control students? How did he learn to maintain his discipline? And how did he punish a student named Coley? To disturb a new teacher, Coley raised his desk cover and then he quickly dropped it. It was made of wood, and the two sides of the desk, they strike, and there was a lot of noise. 500 students sitting in the hall, Mr. Chips standing on the stage, single teacher, and it was very difficult for him to find out who did it. But Mr. Chips proved that he has decided to improve his discipline. He caught Colin, he pointed him out and punished him to write 100 lines. This incident is very important incident throughout the novel, and we often see questions in the examination about this incident. In the last paragraphs, we see that college generation comes to study at Brookfield. We see three colleges. College, the grandfather, the first student Chips punished at Brookfield. Then after 20-25 years, he sends his son to study in the same institution with the same teacher, Mr. Chips. And then we see a grandson after 20-25 years again comes to study, and Mr. Chips used to make fun, used to make jokes about these three students. So this is chapter number 1. We summarized it, we recapitulated the information. These incidences which we find here, which we've discussed here, are the most important one in chapter 1, and you will find short question answers about them in the final examination. Tomorrow we will start our next lesson. Have a very nice time.